So when we're talking about hiring candidates, that's really hard to find good candidates, it seems like today. What are some tips that maybe you can give to small businesses, some practical strategies?
Sure.
Welcome to Small Biz Connect, where we talk all things small biz. I'm Amy Reed, director of the Galveston County and the San Jacinto College SBDC, your host for this podcast. The SBDC is funded in part by the SBA and the state of Texas, where we provide no cost business advice as well as no to low cost workshops. Today, we are privileged to have our guest, Jaime Craig of Savvy HR Consulting. Jaime, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Excited to be here.
So we're just going to jump right in. So tell me a little bit about your business and why you started it.
Sure. So, as you mentioned, the name is Savvy HR Consulting. We provide fractional human resources, services, and consulting to small and medium sized businesses across the US. So, I started my business because I personally wanted more flexibility in my life. But I also felt like there were a lot of things that large corporations are doing from an HR standpoint that our small and medium sized businesses need as well. And although those businesses might not be able to afford a full-time HR person, they can get expert service, from a human resources expert on a fraction of the time, a couple hours a week, project work, those sorts of things. So that's really why I started it, really flexibility. And I felt like there was a need.
And I remember our first conversation when we were talking and you were like, do you think we can do this? And you were telling me how you really saw the need. And I picked up from that very first conversation that you were very much a process driven individual. So thinking about processes and that sort of thing, tell me a mistake that you see that's common in small businesses when it comes to HR.
So one mistake I see is hiring your family and your friends. I think people have a comfort level with doing that. It's somebody that they trust. It's somebody that they know. They know that person's going to lock the door and they're not going to steal from them. But those people might not be what your business needs, right? So if you started, say, a cookie business with your sister and she's a great decorator, then okay, maybe that works, right? But if you've started a different kind of business, you need to be focused on you need to be focused on the requirements of the business and what positions do you need and what are the requirements of those positions versus just trying to plug and play your family and friends, right? A family member who got laid off, right? Or a friend who wants to work part-time because they just had a baby and trying to kind of plug and play them in your business doesn't really work. You need to think about what you need. What do those positions need so that you're really fulfilling what your business needs ultimately.
I think that's really true. I had a client just yesterday who was telling me that they're probably about 75% family and some of the struggles they're having right now. So, is there a quick tip that you could give for someone who already has done that on how maybe they could set boundaries with those family members or those friends that they've hired to kind of steer the ship back into the direction it needs to be?
I would say setting expectations. So even though maybe you didn't have job descriptions because you hired these individuals, going back and creating some job descriptions, right? Thinking about the individuals in those positions. What are they currently doing that you need? What are maybe things that they aren't doing that you need, but you're kind of hesitant to ask them to do? And then also kind of spelling out what you don't want them to do that they might already be doing, right? Especially, I think if you have a parent in the workplace who's, mothering you, right, through your business when you really need to take the reins and be the leader of the business. So I would say those things, but then I would also say creating, maybe some policies, procedures, processes, maybe a handbook, because if not everyone is an employee, or I'm sorry, if not everyone is family, then there are some employees that also need to have some process and some expectations. And so when you're going to create those policies, procedures, handbook, process, whatever, everybody needs to follow them, including the person that created them, right? So if you're going to create a policy that says, we can't have long beards, maybe it's a safety reason, maybe you work in the food, right?
Okay.
Then you as the leader also, or the owner also cannot have a long beard. So you have to set the expectations, you have to follow them, you have to make sure your family members follow up and your employees follow them.
I think that's a great tip. And how often should they look at their handbook to make sure that it's all still relevant?
So I would actually say once a year, which I think sounds probably pretty dramatic to individuals, but there's so much that is changing. I mean, if we just think about the past year, think how much AI has grown in the past year. And what are you allowing your employees to do with AI, right? Are they writing social media posts with AI? Are they creating social media pictures with AI? Are they responding to clients or customer service requests with AI? So I think once a year going through and just kind of checking to see like what's new, right? Making videos, like what is allowed from a video standpoint in the workplace. Um, I used to work in government contracting, and cameras were a no-no, videos were a no-no, and I'm sure they still are in that environment. But knowing what works for your business and then making some practices around what do you think is okay and what is not okay, and then
Love
sticking
that.
to it. You have to be consistent.
And I love that tip. I love the consistency, and that's what we tell our clients all the time. So it's good to know we're telling them the
Yeah.
right thing. So kind of take it. I know I kind of steered us off track just a little bit, but going back to hiring. So when you are, maybe hiring your first person, there's a lot of things you have to think about, like do I have the budget to hire and that type of thing. But from an HR perspective, what are some other things outside of budgeting to make sure you can afford that they should be thinking about for that first hire?
So I would go back to the needs and the requirements. I think the very first thing you need to do is sit down with a blank sheet of paper and think about what do you need that position to do? What is required to do? What would be nice things for that person to do? What would be, potential, bonuses if this person can do, right? Like if you don't need someone to speak Spanish, but they do speak Spanish, does that help you out? Does that help you bring in more clients? Does that help you respond to more customer service requests? And I think you have to be really honest with yourself about what the needs are and put the dirty bad stuff that no one wants to do in the job description, right? Because if you're working, say, a retail boutique, right? Somebody has a vision of what that means, right? I'm going to unlock the door. I'm going to greet customers. I'm going to, maybe help them find clothing, right? But if that person's also responsible to sweep the floor at the end of the night and clean the bathroom, then you need to say that, right? Because that could be a big turnoff for some people. And they may make an assumption that that's not, that you have a cleaning service and they don't have to clean the bathroom. But I think also being very clear about what's required and what you could be flexible on. Because I think sometimes we get so kind of bent on we're 9 to 5, everybody has to be here 9 to 5. When could you be flexible, right? What if you had a mom that, their kid played baseball at 4 o'clock every day or 4 o'clock on Fridays? Can you be flexible, right? Can that person come in at 8 before the store opens, and maybe their job is they're going to vacuum, they're going to clean up from the night before, or they're going to restock the shelves so that the folks that are getting off at 5 aren't there till 6 actually, cleaning and restocking shelves.
I've always loved that philosophy. It's more about the deliverables and just getting things done, not so much about butts in the seats.
Right.
And I think that's a little old school. And I have seen a shift. I'm sure you probably have too, which is nice to see, to where people are trying to be accommodating, yet we have things we have to do. They're within your job description. So I love that. Another thing that we hear a lot is when people come in, they ask us about, 1099, can I just make this person a 1099 contractor? So we always have our tests that we ask, based on what their job description is and that sort of thing. And we refer them to the IRS for a couple different things to make sure compliance. But tips from you, W-2 versus 1099 contractor.
So I will say in this area, I see a lot of 1099s when I start talking to small businesses and asking them questions of how many employees do you have? And they'll go down that path and they'll tell me. And then at some point they'll say, oh, but they're 1099. And I'm like, okay, so they're not employees. So you can't write an employee handbook, right? If you have all 1099s. But you definitely have to assess, you know, how are they doing the tasks? What are the tasks? How are they doing them? When are they doing them? Where are they doing them? Because if you're telling them the what, the how to do it, the where to do it and the when to do it, that's a W-2 employee. That's not a contractor. Now, if you're hiring someone, let's say you're hiring me to do some HR work for you, and you say, I need a performance management process. And that's essentially what you tell me. And I might ask you a deadline when do you need this by? But then you're expecting me to go off and do that. Now I'm going to come back to you and ask you questions of how often do you want to assess your employees? Every 6 months, every 3 months? And we're going to have some conversation back and forth, but you didn't tell me exactly how to do it. You didn't tell me when to do it. We just have a deadline. You didn't tell me where to do it. I could sit at Starbucks. I could sit at my house. I could sit here. So I think people really need to be careful because I do see a lot of small businesses locally in our area that have a lot of 1099 employees. And when that comes up in conversation, I let them know that like, hey, you really need to look at that because I'm not sure they're 1099.
I do the same thing. And the other small piece I think that I add a lot of times is the equipment. Did you give them the laptop? Do you give them the tools, that type of thing, or do they supply it? So I think that's a great tip right there. It was very easy to understand.
Well, and
Yeah.
I think I would add to that when you're talking about tools and equipment is training. Did you
Yes.
train them to do that or did they walk in the door already knowing how to
Right.
do it?
Right. That's a great add. So when we're talking about hiring candidates, that's really hard to find good candidates, it seems like today. What are some tips that maybe you can give to small businesses, some practical strategies?
Sure. So if we think back to kind of having a needs-based job description, I like to write behavioral-based interview questions for each specific job description. So there's some general questions out there. If you just Google, behavioral-based interview questions, you can find a bunch. But really, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. And so, if you can get some behavioral based interview questions about the key skills that you need in that position, I think that's a huge help. And let me give you some examples. So, and these are questions that you can ask, college students fresh out of school, even though they may not have work experience. So, for example, tell me about a time in the past when you've missed a deadline. How did you handle that? What did you do? Right? You're asking them, what did they do? What was their specific action that they did? You're not asking a hypothetical question, which would be, tell me what you would do if you missed a deadline. You're asking how they handled a situation in the past. Another question, once again, that you can still ask people that maybe just have a little bit of work experience or just a college student is tell me about a time when you worked on a group project and somebody didn't pull their weight. What did you do? How did you handle it? But you can write very specific or write very specific interview questions that relate to the job descriptions. So if you have somebody maybe that's working in a nonprofit and their job is to, get donors, right? Tell me how you handled a situation when a big donor committed and they didn't come through. What did you do? How did you handle that? So it's really getting them to tell you about a past incident or past action that they've completed. How did they do it? And you may have to follow up with some questions because you really want to know what they specifically did, not the team did, right? So you want to know what Amy Reed did, not what the whole SBDC did.
Right. And do
So
you recommend that you always ask candidates the same questions and have written questions so you don't stray too much during the interview process?
yes, if you are interviewing candidates for one position A, all of those candidates should be asked the same questions.
And do you believe that you should also score them on each of those questions and then compare those?
Scoring is very helpful if you're doing kind of like a 1 through 5 and your interview panel or your business has that. Scoring can be hugely helpful and it's consistent, it's defensible if you've done it the same way for everybody.
Okay. So a little detour before you get to the interview, that resume that comes through, or maybe in the interview too, what are some red flags business owners can watch for both on that resume and in the interview?
Sure. So I know a big flag that, or people think that gaps on a resume are a big red flag. That's not a big red flag to me. So I just kind of want to pull that out. There's a lot of reasons that people can have gaps in resumes. And you're welcome to ask them, maybe what they were doing at that time if they're willing to share. They could have just had a baby. They could have been caring for a loved one, maybe a parent. They could have had maybe a spouse that's moved. I have friends that are in the military, and, every time the husband has to move, the whole family goes. But the wife is taking some time to get the kids settled, get the house settled, before she jumps into a new job. So there's good reasons for gaps. And so I don't see that as big of a red flag. A red flag to me would be short jobs, position people that have been in that position for just short periods of time and they're kind of job hopping around, especially if they've been out of college for a couple of years. College students, I wouldn't hold that against them. They might be having to switch jobs every couple of months or every semesters to maybe align with the school schedule. Um, I would also say if I think you said, did you say before the interview?
Hmm.
Okay, I was going to say consistency between what they're telling you between the resume and the interview.
Hmm.
Um, can't think of anything else at the
Okay.
moment.
So what are things during the interview, even if it's a, say, a Zoom interview that people can watch for as far as body language or across the desk from someone in an interview? What are maybe red flags there or green flags?
Okay. So I'll go to the
Okay.
inconsistency, right? So if you're asking those behavioral based interview questions and you're kind of getting like a feeling of like, well, their resume says they did this, but they're not really describing that well. Then they may not have done all of the things of the job, right? And that goes to the whole like, what did they do versus what did the team do? Um, Trying to think what else in an interview. I would say if there's a lot of distraction going on during the interview, if they're looking around a lot, is somebody kind of giving them cues off camera? But then that also says to me that they're not focused, that this isn't, if they can't give you their undivided attention, then this isn't that important to them. I think that would be another red flag.
I agree. I think eye contact is so important, whether you're in a Zoom or you're in face to face, and I do think that coming with prepared questions for me, if there are no questions at the end, sometimes, and that's just personal, that I just want you to be overly prepared and excited about the job, so I feel that you should come with questions. So for me, that's my personal red flag that I generally look at. So now we've had the interview, we've looked at the resume, and it's time to onboard. Can you talk to me about what a strong onboarding process might look like for some of our really small micro businesses as well as maybe our up to medium businesses?
Sure. So I would say definitely have a checklist. I have a checklist for onboarding. I have a checklist for exiting if you're terminating, and a checklist for exiting if you're resigning, because there's different things that you need. So I would say definitely have a checklist. Add to it as you go. There's no problem making edits and updating things as you go. But I would also think about like what break that checklist down into like what do we need to do day one, what can be week one, what can be week two, maybe something by 3 months, 60, 30, 60, 90 days, right? Have those checkpoints with your, new employees. So, day one, you need that, I-9, right? Maybe week one that you need them to enroll in benefits, right? So think about you don't have to do everything day one. Day one is very overwhelming for people. They're usually nervous about a new job. They've stressed all night. They haven't slept and maybe they haven't ate and they got stuck in traffic. So do just exactly what you have to do for day one and give them some time to, get logged into a computer or spend some time with coworkers. And then I would also say, is there some task that you can give them? Maybe not day one, maybe it's day two. There's kind of some easy wins for them to complete that week.
Great idea.
So just, small tasks. Maybe it's something that they need to learn or get a little training on. Or it's just completing some of the, tasks on the checklist, for the week. But I would definitely, check in with them maybe on Friday of the week or the following Monday. And then also just periodically, like I said, maybe at the end of 2 weeks, at the end of, 30, 60, 90 days, make sure they've completed the benefits so they don't, miss an enrollment. Ask if they have any questions. And you can even give them a heads up, I always I always advise people don't give someone a heads up on a Friday that you want to meet with them on Monday. They'll stress about it all weekend, right? So if you want to have a check-in with the employee, maybe let them know on Monday, hey, let's touch base tomorrow. And bring any questions that you might have had that we haven't answered yet, right? That way they kind of only have one night. I mean, it's just human nature that people stress about it and they think, oh, I'm going to get laid off or, something like that. When really I'm just trying to give you the heads up so you come prepared.
And I love that. I think that, a lot of people with small organizations, it's hard because they don't have HR on hand. So they're just trying to figure out what works best for them. I know here at my centers, what I do is we schedule one-on-ones biweekly. So it's usually up to the employees what they want to talk about. But if there is something, a hard conversation that I need to have, that time is already allotted. It's not a stressful time because we're already established. So that's something that I've felt, we've implemented that has worked really well for us. Talk to me a little bit about some of those other businesses where they can't afford to have HR on staff and how they can handle culture issues. Are there some tips to improve culture and employee relations?
So I think having the one-on-ones is great. I would recommend that everywhere. But I think also having, team meetings, and they don't have to be super structured. I mean, you really have to go with what your environment is, right? If you're running a boutique, you don't have a conference room. You're not going to make PowerPoint charts, but you could have a stand-up meeting. Maybe you have a stand-up meeting every Wednesday. That's the slow day, whatever. Just to kind of go through like, what are some things that are happening? Hey guys, we're not getting all the clothes out of the dressing rooms every night. That's a really important thing we need to do. Go through like what are the events that are happening, the following week. We're having a celebration for, Veterans Day on this day. So, wear your red, white, and blue. Just some like friendly reminders. And then also as the leader, giving everyone the opportunity to ask questions and not just once, a couple of times, right? Does anybody have any questions? Pausing, waiting, giving people the space to do that. And then I think as a small business, I made a social post the other week and jokingly kind of made some humor about your, buying pizza for the office is not a Christmas bonus, right? But as a small business owner, you're limited on budget. Doing little things like that, and it doesn't always have to be pizza, right? It can be grabbing everybody's, Starbucks. It can be, grabbing some buntinis or some cookies or, something like that, and just kind of paying attention to what's going on in your employees' lives, right? If I'm coming in late tomorrow because my kid's in a program, maybe you put a little reminder on your calendar the day before that I'm going to be out. And so as I'm leaving that night, you say, hey, I hope your, son or daughter does great in the program, right? Things like that mean a lot to people because it means you heard them, you understand what they're going through, you see them and you know that it's important to them.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I do think that some of our smaller businesses have a problem drawing that line though. So, you do things for them, you know about their kids, whatever that might look like, but do you need to socialize with them outside the office? How does that affect if there's a hard conversation? So, can you talk a little bit about what the boundaries should be from a legal and maybe from just, keeping a good solid culture in a business?
Yeah. So I would definitely be careful about socializing with your employees outside of work. I would be 10 times more careful if alcohol is involved. Alcohol becomes a huge problem when people are socializing outside of work. Things are said that would not normally be said, in a workplace. So I would definitely be careful about that. If you are going to socialize with your employees outside of work, you need to make sure that everyone's invited. So it can't be kind of two or your three of your favorite buddies and you're going to happy hour every Thursday. If you're going to go to happy hour every Thursday, then make it a known thing. Everybody's invited, everybody can come, that kind of thing. I would also say mix it up because, there are people that don't drink, right? So they're not going to ever come to your happy hour, possibly. So is there different things you can do? Hey, we're going to go to lunch one day or, does anybody want to, Wednesdays are slow day or we open later on Wednesdays, let's meet for breakfast, making sure that it's open to everyone, but also not required. Because if you require business hours or certain hours, that's what the employee is required to do. They do not need to come early for breakfast or stay late for happy hour. So inviting everyone, but then making sure everyone understands it's not required.
Great tip. Is there a point in time where a business should know that it's time to outsource their HR? They maybe can't afford to have someone on staff, but they can afford a monthly subscription or something like that. So, is there a time when there's some key indicators when it's time to outsource?
Yeah, so I would say if you're starting to deal with issues that you're a little unsure about and you're feeling a little like I'm not sure if I'm doing this correctly, that's probably a good time. I also say that, there are certain employment laws that you hit with different numbers of employees, right? So, for example, Family Medical Leave Act, that's a 50 employees, right? And there's some specifics about location and all that kind of stuff, but there's a lot of requirements that come with FMLA, letters that you have to issue, documentation that you have to collect. So if you're getting close to that number, you probably need to talk to somebody because if you have to deal with that, that's a lot of kind of administrative paperwork, but you're also getting into that, HIPAA issue of medical information, personal information. So definitely when you're, getting to that point. But I would just say if whoever is handling it is feeling overwhelmed by it or feeling like I'm not so sure we're doing this correctly, you probably need to talk to somebody. I've had companies call me where they've got an unemployment claim and, oh, I need your help, right? And I've never talked to them before. Oh, I need your help. And it's like, okay, well, there's only so much I can help you with at this point because all of the actions have already taken place. So I can kind of guide you through what you need to do now, but there's a lot of proactive things that I can help you with. So I can guide you through this, but when we're done, we should really do these proactive things. And I don't know if I'm handling that incorrectly or they are because they'll get guided through the problem and then they move on. And it's like you're going to have that problem again, right? You need the expectations, you need the policies and procedures, you need the handbook, you need to document what you're doing. And so if you're just solving problems and moving on and not getting to like the root cause of the problem and it keeps happening, you probably need some HR help.
I think that's good advice. What about as far as current trends? Do you see something coming down the pipeline that may be changing how people run HR or maybe more fractional HR, that type of thing?
So I'll go back to the AI because I don't do high volume recruiting, but there's a lot of things I can do with your staffing process and helping you through the staffing process, as we've already discussed. But I've had people say to me, "Well, can I just use Chat GPT to write a job description?" Well, sure you can, but does ChatGPT know everything about your business? Do they know the problems you've had in the past or what's worked really well? Does ChatGPT have 25 years of HR experience to tell you, like, well, if you word it that way, it could be perceived this way? And does ChatGPT know that, if you're a roofing company, you should probably be putting in your job description that you have to climb a 50-foot ladder, right? So different things like that that you need to think about that you need to make sure that people don't assume, oh, we're a roofing company. Of course they should assume to climb the ladder. No, not if the position is maybe a marketing position. I might assume I have to sit in an office. But as the marketing person, if you expect me to climb the ladder and take pictures of the guys on the roof, I would want to know that.
Yeah. I think AI just gets you started. You have to keep
Yes.
that human in the loop, and it's just a good starting point and someone to brainstorm basically if you're like a solopreneur. So I think that's great advice.
Well, and I would add, I've also heard people running resumes through AI and using maybe different recruiting companies using different AI tools to kind of screen candidates and screen resumes. I think you got to be really careful with that. A lot of computerized tools have bias in them. And until that gets kind of figured out, you could be screening out a whole bunch of people based on a keyword or just based on how they phrase something. So I think you really have to be careful. I like what you said is use it as a brainstorming tool. You need to edit, you need to read through it. And you need to not take the first answer. When you're using a chat GPT, ask it more questions. what might be the physical requirements of this job? What could be an unexpected requirement of this job? What am I missing? Those kinds of things.
Dig in a little bit.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. And I am surprised how many of the larger businesses are really relying on AI, and great resumes are never even coming across the desk to the recruiter because AI is taking them out, and they're just forgetting about the bias. And I think there are some softwares maybe that, are designed with less, but it's still not the same as a human. So
And I've
yeah.
seen a post recently where somebody had claimed that their recent college grad had applied to like 150 to 200 jobs. And they kind of came and they hadn't gotten a job. And they kind of come to the conclusion that, like, was any human actually looking at their resume? And so they sat down and printed resumes and mailed them to places and got a job because of that, because somebody had to open the mail, somebody had to look at it. So yeah, I mean, there's all these trends, right? Just like fashion trends go out and then they come back, right? I don't know. Are we going to go back to, old fashioned, paper resume screening so that candidates actually get attention?
Might make you stand out a little bit. And I think that's one of the keys with the resume. So taking a bit of a personal turn, you are still a startup.
Yes.
You haven't been in business, past the 2 years yet, approaching. But some advice to our listeners for people who are wanting to start a business. What has this journey been like for you?
It can be stressful. I would say the number one piece of advice is you should have some money in the bank. I think there's a lot of, stories on social media or TikTok or whatever about, oh, I started this business and I was making $10 million, by month 3. And, I don't think that happens. I don't, I mean, maybe one in a
15 years, I
million.
don't think so either.
Yeah, I don't think that happens at all. So I think you need to have some money in the bank, right, to pay the bills, to pay the mortgage, so that you can comfortably, grow your business and take the time to learn. I mean, the SBDC has been huge for me. As you know, I've asked you a ton of questions and you're a wealth of knowledge, but I've also used a lot of free workshops and classes. I recently did the AI boot camp, and I've attended a lot of the AI workshops. But I've attended other SBDC classes and workshops, as well as just things in our community. Different organizations or businesses offer free workshops, and taking advantage of those when you can. I mean, I have an MBA, but that's, 25 years ago, right? So I'm not going back to those, textbooks to see how did we run business 25 years ago, right? You need the kind of, the current information. How is current marketing done? Social media didn't even exist, 25 years ago. So taking advantage of that, there's a lot of free networking opportunities, especially here in our local area. There are multiple chambers around the area that can be immensely helpful. Um, just so many different things. And don't go in assuming you have to be the expert with everything. I would say I'm an expert in HR. I have 25 years of experience. I am not an expert in sales and marketing at all. That's never been my thing, right? And so finding people that can help you with that. So I met a gentleman at the chamber a long time ago, and he used to be a sales manager for Verizon. He knows sales and marketing like the back of his hand. And he's been willing to mentor me once a month. We hop on a Zoom call for 30 minutes to an hour,
Awesome.
and we talk through, what am I doing? What's working? What's not working? And he'll help me brainstorm my, different ideas and stuff like that. And I mean, he doesn't have to do that. He's doing that for free. He's taking time out of his day to do that.
Love that.
And so I think, finding people like that, and then just, at the end of every call, I try to remember to ask him, is there anything I can do for you? So I think just realizing that you might be an expert in one thing, but you don't have to be an expert in everything. You can hire other fractional HR people, or I mean, sorry, not other fractional HR people. You can hire other fractional people, right? There's fractional finance people. You can hire a bookkeeper. You can hire fractional marketing people. So focusing on like what is your sweet spot, and then kind of getting help from other experts.
I think that's great advice. And the thing you said about TikTok, that I have to admit, I try to be a really positive person, but sometimes I'm on TikTok and I see that stuff and I have to comment, please stop lying to people.
Right.
I just can't, I can't deal with it. So I have to say something. But last question, Tell all of our listeners how they can reach out to you if they're interested in more information.
Sure. So we are on social media. We are not on TikTok. So we are on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Our website is www.savvyhrconsultingllc.com. That is also the end of my email. So my email is Jaime, which is JAIME at savvyhrconsultingllc.com. If you're in the local area, you might catch me at a networking event, or a League City Chamber event, or anything the SBDC is doing.
Awesome. Well, we will also make sure we put all your links in the comments so that people will know how to contact with you just one click. So,
Okay.
to our listeners, thanks for tuning in today to Small Biz Connect, where big ideas meet small biz. And just make sure you subscribe and catch us next month.